All right, so this morning we're continuing our series in the story. I got a question for you. How many of y'all read chapter 3 this week? A couple. Okay, you're a week early. That's all right. That's all right. I should have said something. So, but that's all right because you're early. It's all good. You're not late. Early's always be better than late. But we're going to do chapter 2 times this week, and then we're going to do chapter 3 for 2 weeks next time. So if you got that little yellow sheet, there's no. It tells you where we're going. But that's all right. It's all good being early. So today we're actually going to stay in chapter 2, and we're going to finish it up. Last Sunday we talked about Abraham and the life of Abraham. And chapter 2 really spanned 3 generations. Abraham, and then his son Isaac, and then Isaac's 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. So chapter 2 covered all 3 of those generations, but there's just too much material, too many good stories, too many good truths that we have to pull out of those to do that in just one teaching time. So last week we did the life of Abraham and how God set this nation through him, and then today we're going to look at the second half of the second chapter and looking at the life of Isaac and then Jacob and Esau. So God sets up this nation through Abraham, and he gives Isaac to him in his old age, and now this great nation is off and running. So if you got your copy of the story, you can open up to page 21, and you can see in there's a full page recap. This is basically recapping everything from the end of Abraham's life all the way through, about 100 years of history on this in page 21. Look at Genesis 25, 8 through 11. It says, Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of, near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zophar the Hittite, the field Abraham bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer Lahai Roi. So Abraham's now dead. Abraham has passed away. He is buried. So now Isaac is the patriarch of this great family. But before Abraham's death, he makes sure that Isaac gets a son, or gets a wife. He makes sure that he has a wife for his son. And this is a great story. You see, Abraham didn't want Isaac to marry a Canaanite woman. He wanted him to marry someone from his homeland. So he gets a servant. He tells the servant to get all the stuff, get some camels, get all this stuff, and go all the way back to my homeland and find a wife for my son. So here is Abraham's servant, and he probably, more likely traveled with Abraham. So he goes 600 miles, takes him a long time to journey all the way to the promised land. And then Abraham's like, hey, look, I need you to go back. Go all the way back, find someone for my son, find a wife for my son, and then come all the way back again. So this dude's like, frequent walking miles. I don't know. So, he's going back and forth, back and forth. So the servant takes all of camels and all of these gifts for the people, and he goes and he prays for a wife. He prays for a wife for Isaac, and then Rebekah walks out, and she comes out, and he sees her, and he knows right away that this is the woman that he prayed for. This is going to be Isaac's wife. Turns out she was actually the daughter of Abraham's brother. So this was actually Isaac's cousin, but back in the day that was all good. This was not Kentucky. That's all right. And then the servant knows that this is the right woman. This is the right woman. So he brings her back, and Isaac falls in love with her, and all is well. All is well. It's a storybook ending. Well, not really. Not really. See, because a lot of times when we look at God's story and we look at God's timing, it seems like there's always a stage of waiting that needs to be completed. Isaac and Rebekah are married, and 25 years later, she still has no children, and they still have no children. Look at Genesis 25, 19 through 21. It says, This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. So 25 years of marriage, and they're still childless. She is barren. This is another part of the Old Testament that we miss sometimes is how important children were. Because here's the deal. We read in the Old Testament, sometimes what we do is we read the Old Testament in 21st century terms instead of 2000 BC terms. Having kids was everything. Having children was everything. If you did not have kids back then, your life was basically almost worthless. You see, these people back in the day, they didn't have bank accounts. They didn't have 401ks. They didn't have fancy cars or big houses. What they had instead was kids. They had kids. It was their retirement plan. It was their 401k. Because it was the children that would take over and inherit the land and inherit the livestock and their position in the community or the village. It was your children that took care of you when you were old, and it was your children who buried you after you were dead. So not having children was a big problem, a huge problem. And 25 years after getting married, the fact that they didn't have any kids, this was a huge deal. A huge deal. And it was an even bigger problem because of the covenant that God had made with Abraham and then passed down to Isaac. You're going to be the father of a great nation. It's hard to be the father of a great nation when you have no children. 25 years they waited and waited and waited. This is another thing that we'll start to see when we look at the Old Testament is waiting. Very, very rarely does God call someone and tell them right away what the game plan is and what the reward is, and this is it, and boom, 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 it's good to go. Very rarely does that ever happen. The norm is that God will call someone, not tell them what's going on, not tell them what the blessing is going to be, not show them the end of the story, but just have them wait. And the reason is that God always operates that way, and He still does, so that He can see the faith of the person that He is calling. If God was going to call someone He wanted to make sure that they were serious, make sure they were full of faith, make sure that they were willing to wait on God and His perfect plan and His perfect time. It was a test, not unlike the test that Abraham had to endure with almost sacrificing Isaac. But throughout the Bible, we see people that God has called wait and wait and wait for God's timing. So in this life, if you do have to wait for God's timing, take heart. You're not alone. Don't rush it. Have faith and have patience and trust in Him. So Isaac and Rebekah, after 25 years, finally have a child. Not just one, but two. Rebekah is blessed. She becomes pregnant with twins. So how amazing is that after 25 years of being barren and not being able to have kids, here she's got twins now. Everything is good. And because of these twins, Rebekah has the blessing of God speaking directly to her. In Genesis 25, the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went and inquired of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So God tells her, He's like, look, there are two babies inside of you, and there are two nations that will come from these two babies. And the younger will rule over the older, and the older will serve the younger. This must have been just a completely crazy statement for Rebekah to hear from God. The younger would rule over the older. No, that's not the way things work in our society. That's not the way things work in our culture back in 2000 BC. To us, we're reading it, we don't think much of it. But this is another instance where we have to understand the time and the culture and the society norms. In ancient times, everything revolved around the firstborn child. The firstborn son got the birthright, and the birthright was everything. The blessing that came from the father onto the firstborn son was the most important. Because what happened is that everything that the father had, his entire possessions, all of his wealth, if he was wealthy, all of his land, everything would get divided up and handed to his children. But to the firstborn son who had the birthright, they would get a double portion of the inheritance. So if there were 10 children, they would break it up into 11 parcels, and the firstborn would get 2 of them. In ancient times, it's all about the first son. So if this was ancient times right now, and I died, Grant would get a vast majority of what I have. It's not much. He probably wouldn't want it, but that's okay. He'd have to deal with it. But everything went to the firstborn son. And it's not just the possessions that went to the firstborn son. The way the standing, the community standing of the person would go to his firstborn son. If the father was the main herder of cattle in a certain region and he died, then his firstborn son would now be the herder of cattle in that region. If the father was an elder of the tribe and he died, then the firstborn son would become the elder in there. If this was the ancient times and I dropped dead right now, Grant would be your new preacher. The firstborn becomes the leader of the family. So everything is about the firstborn. The firstborn is the most important. But if you've been paying attention at all just in these first 3 weeks, you already know that God doesn't do things the way humans do things. Here with Isaac and Rebekah, these twins are about to be born. God is going to flip this script. He's going to flip the script, and this is not the only time He's going to flip the script. God is telling Rebekah that the youngest brother will be greater than the older one. The older one is going to serve the younger one. It's the opposite of what's supposed to happen, the opposite of the norm. Normally it's the oldest that gets the inheritance, not the youngest. But God says not this time. The youngest is going to be the greatest. You see, God knew these two boys inside Rebekah's belly. He knew these two boys, and he knew which one needed to be the one that was going to be a part of this line of Abraham down to Jesus. Because this is what we need to see, is God is setting up a perfect line from Abraham to Jesus. And he's picking out the ones that he believes will be the most suited for that job, for that line. So who Isaac blesses and makes his heir is super important, because not only will they get everything he has, all of his possessions or his standing in the community, but he will also be the father of many nations and the father of many kings. So God tells Rebekah it's going to be the younger one. And this becomes a reoccurring pattern in the Old Testament, because God over and over and over again chooses the one that's the younger one. You know, Jacob has 12 sons, and it isn't the firstborn who gets the inheritance. It's not the firstborn or the secondborn or the thirdborn. It's actually the fourth one in line who gets the blessing from Jacob, and that his name was Judah. And that's why Jesus is called a lion roaring from the tribe of Judah, because Jesus' lineage comes through the fourth-born son from Jacob. So even though the firstborn and the birthright and all that is important, to God, the character is more important than anything. And God is going to do all that he can to make sure that the line goes through and then it stays blessed. God tells this to Isaac. He says, the Lord appeared to Isaac. Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all of these lands, and I will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give them all of these lands. And through your offspring all of the nations will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commandments, my decrees, and my instructions. So God takes this promise that he has given to Abraham several times, and he passes it right down to Isaac and says, look, because you are his son, you are getting all of these things as well. This is important because God is letting him know what this promise is, letting him know what this covenant is. And he's telling him exactly what he expects of Isaac and the people that follow him, because he doesn't want the people to stray away. God is passing down this promise to Isaac, and now Isaac and Rebekah have two sons. Esau, the firstborn, and then Jacob, the one born second. Esau is the oldest. He is the rightful heir to his father's blessing, to be in the line and the lineage of Abraham, and eventually down to Jesus. But God has already told Rebekah that it's going to be the opposite. The boys grow up. Esau is a hunter. He's a gatherer. He's a man of the wilderness. He likes being outside. He's a good archer. The Bible tells us that Jacob had a quiet temperament, and he liked to stay among the tents. So he doesn't want to go outside. Jacob does. One day Esau, he comes in from a particularly bad day of hunting, and he is hungry, maybe even a little hangry. All right, he comes up to Jacob. Jacob's making some stews, and he says, "Give me a bowl of stew." And Jacob, whose name means deceiver or grabber, says, "Look, I'll give you a bowl of stew, but in order for me to give at you, you're going to have to give me your birthright. You're going to have to trade me your birthright." This is a big thing here. Esau giving away the lasting benefits of his birthright for a bowl of stew. It's a special honor given to the firstborn son, the double portion, and he is giving this to Jacob for a bowl of soup. And this shows us absolutely everything that we need to know about Esau and his character and his life. He acts on impulse, satisfies his immediate desire without pausing to consider the long-term consequences of what he's about to do. He's hungry, and he wants it now. He's about to starve to death, or at least that's how he feels. But if you really stop and think about this, Esau is the firstborn son of Isaac, who is a super wealthy. Abraham was super wealthy. All of that passed down Isaac. Super wealthy family, huge family, ton of servants. It's very hard-pressed to think that Esau couldn't just walk to the next tent, knock on the door and say, "Hey, will somebody give me a morsel of bread or something? Give me something to hold me over until I can get a good thing." And he could probably get that for free. Yet Esau sells his birthright, the most important thing in his entire life, to his brother for a bowl of stew. For a bowl of stew. This is a huge character flaw of Esau. Instant gratification. He was very impulsive and did things without thinking. And that's why God told Rebekah that Jacob would be greater. So a little time later, Isaac is very old and he's very close to death. And it's time for him to pass on his blessing to the rightful heir of his estate. So before Isaac dies, he has to bless one of his sons to officially become the heir and officially be the thing. Now Esau should be the rightful heir, being the oldest one. But since he sold away his birthright to Jacob, now Jacob has the full right to that blessing. Esau has no right and no call and nothing at all to get that blessing from Isaac. Jacob is the heir. Jacob is the rightful one to take over after Isaac and the one to be in the line of Abraham. It's Jacob's right, but Isaac is stubborn, and he's going to give that blessing to Esau anyway. And here the biblical author is super clear that Isaac's favorite was Esau, and that Rebekah's favorite was Jacob. So Rebekah's standing there, and she's in the tent, and she hears Isaac tell Esau, hey, go out and cook me a meal. Go out, go hunting, cook me a meal, bring it back, and I will bless you and give this blessing down to you. So Rebekah's like, now wait a minute. You know, Jacob is the one who should rightfully have the birthright. So she tells Jacob, and she devises this own plan to get Isaac's blessing for Jacob. Jacob puts on Esau's clothes, puts on animal skins on his arms to feel more hairy, and brings Isaac a meal that Esau would normally bring and cook for him. Isaac believes that this is in fact Esau, and he gives Jacob the blessing that he was wanting to give to Esau. Genesis 27:26 through 29 says this. Then the father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness and abundance of grain and new wine. May the nations serve you and the peoples bow down before you and be Lord over your brothers. And may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and may those who bless you be blessed. So Isaac passes this blessing down to Jacob. Jacob is the heir. He is the new head of household. He is the one that is in the line of Abraham. And there's nothing that anyone can do about it now. God told Rebekah that the younger would be over the older. Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, and now Isaac has given his blessing to Jacob. And that's all there is to it. But that still doesn't sit too well with Isaac or Esau. After Isaac blessed Jacob, Esau comes in from hunting and he brings food, and both of them begin to understand what just happened. Genesis 27:33 through 35 says this. Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed. When Esau heard his father's word, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry, and he said to his father, bless me too, my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. So Esau is distraught. Isaac is distraught. Isaac trembled violently. Esau let out a bitter cry. They are distraught. They are upset. They are angry. But honestly, they really don't have a right to be. You know, a lot of times when we read this story, we look at Jacob as a villain here. And we look at Isaac and Esau as people who have been wronged, who have been robbed. You know, a lot of times we look at this and we say, how could Jacob do that to his brother? How could Jacob take away something from his brother that was his? How could he do that to his dad? How could he deceive his dad? But when we really think about it, we really understand what's going on. It's really not Jacob's fault that he deceived his father and took the blessing. Isaac should have never been trying to give that blessing to Esau, and Esau should have never been trying to get that blessing from his father. When we read through this and fully understand what's going on, we see that Isaac and Esau are not really the victims. Yeah, Jacob lied, and it's obviously wrong. And yeah, he did it deceitfully, but he did that to get a blessing that was rightfully his. Isaac was being stubborn, Esau was being selfish, and they were both going against the birthright and the will of God. So it's important for us to understand that, because we need to know that Jacob is legitimately in this line between Abraham and Jesus. Because if we just look at Jacob as this terrible person who did this terrible thing and stole this blessing that wasn't his at all to steal, then we would say, why in the world would God take someone who is a liar and a deceiver, and someone who stole from his family and deceived his dad? Why would he take that person and put him in the line between Abraham and Jesus? Why in the world would God use him? Why would God use someone like that? But when we understand that it was rightfully his, we can understand that he was doing really what he had to do. This doesn't help Esau, of course. Esau is angry. And in his character, he's a hothead, and he's ready to go. So he says, look, as soon as Dad dies, I'm going to kill him, and I'm going to take what's rightfully mine. So Rebekah tells Jacob to leave. Rebekah tells Jacob to go. She sends him back to the homeland, to Laban, her brother. So he travels all the way back, 600 miles, back to Abraham's beginning. But there he sees a woman, and he falls madly in love with her, and her name was Rachel. And he loved her so deeply. So he strikes up a deal with his uncle, her father, to work for him for 7 years to get her hand in marriage. So he works the 7 years and everything's good. The wedding day comes, everything's good. The next morning he wakes up just to realize that he himself has been deceived, and it's actually Leah, the oldest sister, not Rachel. So he goes back to Laban. He says, I tell you what, work another 7 years and then I'll give you Rachel. Jacob loves Rachel so deeply that 7 years is like nothing. He gets her, he eventually marries her. He has 2 wives, and each of them have a servant apiece. And through those 4, Jacob has 12 sons. Leah gave birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Rachel's servant, Bilhah, gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. Leah's servant gave birth to Gad and Asher. Leah then gave birth to Issachar and Zebulun and a daughter, Dinah. Then God blesses Rachel, and she gives birth to Joseph, and then much later also to Benjamin. So 12 sons and at least 1 daughter. And this is important because these 12 sons will eventually set up what we know as the 12 tribes of Israel. We'll read about the rest of the Old Testament about these 12 tribes and eventually into the New Testament. So God blesses Jacob, and he blesses him with this great, huge family and all of these children, which is so good because the first 2 generations with Abraham and then Isaac, there was only one son through there, 1 heir through there. But now this is great. He's got a huge family. He's been blessed with these children. He's been blessed with cattle and livestock. All of his crops have done well. God has also blessed Laban as a result of Jacob being there. But Jacob finally decides that it's time for him to go back. It's time for him to go back to the land that was promised to his grandfather Abraham. So he tries to leave, but Laban's not having it. He knows that he's been blessed because of Jacob being there. So he says, no, you can't go. But finally, being in his character, Jacob flees from Laban with his 2 wives, their servants, and all of their children. They take the caravan 600 miles back to the promised land. But there's only one problem. There's only one problem. In order to get back to where they need to be, they have to go through the region where his brother Esau is. Now we know for sure it's been at least 14 years. It's more likely been more than 20 years since he's seen his brother, but he is still absolutely terrified of him. He is absolutely terrified that his brother is still angry, still looking to kill him. So what he does is he sends scouts ahead to see where Esau is and what's going on. And the scouts come back and they're like, we got bad news. Not only is Esau there, he's got 400 men with him, and it gets worse, they're coming this way. So of course, Jacob is in trouble now. He is very fearful. So this is what he does. He sends ahead servants with oxen and donkeys and flocks, male servants and female servants, all gifts for Esau. And he sends the servants ahead with all of these gifts and hope that Esau will forgive him and deal with him gently. He then splits his camps into 2 divisions. That way, if Esau attacks, then at least half of his family will survive. He then sends more gifts of goats and ewes and rams and camels and calves, cows, bulls and donkeys, and he sends them all there. But then the next morning, here comes Esau. And we see these 2 brothers, both with just, a lot of people around these 2 huge camps coming together, and here comes Esau. And Jacob's terrified. Genesis 33, 1-4 says this. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. So here's Jacob is absolutely terrified that his brother's coming to kill him. But it couldn't be any further from the truth. Esau comes, and you can just picture this, just him tackling him, hugging him, kissing him, and weeping with him. Esau has grown up, Esau has matured, and he has forgiven and missed his little brother. He embraces and he weeps with him. He returns all of the gifts. Esau has done very well for himself. He's very wealthy in his own right, and he has forgiven his brother, and he has moved on. So Jacob settles in Shechem in the site of the city of Salem, which will eventually become Jerusalem. You know, Jacob has come back to the land of Abraham and Isaac and now of himself. And God makes sure to let him know exactly what he expects. And God makes sure that he knows that every blessing that is going to be given to him. 35:10-12 says this. And God said to him, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." So he named him Israel, and God said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and increase in number. A nation and a community of nations will come from you, and kings will be among your descendants. The land I gave to Abraham and Isaac I also give to you, and I will give this land to your descendants after you." So here God takes this covenant promise that he's given to Abraham, that he's given to Isaac, and now he passes it down to Jacob. He is now the patriarch of this great nation in the place where he needs to be. There are now only 39 generations to Jesus. Because remember, it's all about Jesus. The whole reason God is setting up this nation, the whole reason that God is going to all of this trouble to make sure the right people are in place is so Jesus can come, so that the Messiah can come. So for that to happen, God needs the best of the best. And that's why even though Jacob started out as timid and fearful and a deceiver, he had God's blessing, and we see God grow him. You know, there are 4 stages in the life of Jacob, each marked by an encounter with God. When he took his birthright from Esau, and Esau was going to kill him, he fled to Laban instead of standing up to Esau and trusting that God would take care of him and protect him. During his flight, God appeared to him and confirmed the blessing and awakened in him a knowledge of God and a love of God. That was the first stage. Then he went to Laban and he got married and he had a family and everything grew and he was blessed, and he tried to leave, but Laban wouldn't let him. So again he fled. But this time, the difference this time is that he waited on God to tell him when to go. He waited more than 6 years for God to tell him when to flee. And that was the second stage. Then when fleeing from Laban, he had to head to Esau, and he had no choice but to meet with him. He put all of his faith in God. And that night he literally grabbed onto God, and that was the third stage. And then at the end of his life, Jacob did not do anything at all in his life without God specifically telling him to do so. When Joseph calls him and tells him that it's time to go to Egypt, he waits for God to tell him to go before he even considers it at all. It was God that took Jacob where he needed. That was the last stage. So we see through this life of Jacob, we see a life of growth. We see him throughout these chapters in Genesis, him grow and grow and grow and grow. He grows stronger in his faith. He grows stronger in his trust in God. He grows in his boldness and is less fearful because he knows that God will take care of him. He grows in his maturity and his spirituality. Jacob grows into the man that God needs him to be. You see, God did not just take Jacob and set him up as the leader of this nation, the leader of these people, the father of these 12 sons, and then just leave him alone and say, well, good luck. That's not how he did it. He set him up and he grew him and grew him and grew him. And that needs to be the same in our lives. That's got to be the same in our lives. People should be able to look at us and say, man, I've really seen how they've grown. I really see how they've grown. If you are in the same place in your spiritual maturity right now as you were 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, then there is a grave problem that needs to be fixed if you're not growing. You see, oftentimes we come to church. We come to church and we don't grow. We don't seek to grow. We don't strive to be better. We just show up when it's convenient, if there's nothing else going on at all, and we count that as good enough. We go on with life and we don't seek God and we don't seek to grow. It should not be like this at all. We should not stay the way we are. We should be constantly growing and maturing. We should be digging into the Word of God. We should be spending time with God in prayer. We should be with others in the faith and fellowship and accountability. We should be serving and worshiping. We should be growing, because here's the deal. We have a mission. You have a mission, and I have a mission. I have a unique call from God to bring glory to Him in everything that I do. And you have a unique calling in your life to bring glory to God in everything that you do. And God needs us to be equipped to fulfill that purpose, to fulfill that call. And we cannot do that if we don't grow. You see, God's the potter, we're the clay, and He has to mold us into what we want, but we have to let Him. If you don't give Him control, you're not going to grow. You have to grab onto Him and not let go. There's a weird story from Jacob's life that I want to end with this morning. This is a story about Jacob wrestling with God. Literally wrestling with God. You see, the night before Jacob is to meet with Esau, he's all alone. And suddenly he's in a struggle with a man. And they struggle and struggle and struggle all the way till the break of day. This is Genesis 32, 24 through 31. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let go unless you bless me." Then the man said, "What's your name?" "Jacob," he answered. The man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." The man replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him here. So Jacob called the place Peniel, because I saw God's face. I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed through Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. So God wrestles with God, and he refuses to let go. He refuses to let go until God gives him what he needs. This is so contradictory to the rest of Jacob's life. Because Jacob, if there was any conflict at all, Jacob was running in the other direction. The whole fight or flight thing, he was always a flight kind of person. But here he says, no, I'm going to grab on, and I am not going to let go until I get what I need. He grabbed onto God, and he held on, even through a dislocated hip. It was that moment in Jacob's life where he was born again as a person, as a follower of God, and as a man of righteousness. Born again in this moment. And God symbolizes it with a name change. No longer will you be Jacob, which means deceiver or grabber. Now your name will be Israel, which means to let God rule. There was a change, a new birth, and now he is going to cling to God for the rest of his life. And every single thing that he does will be through that, through God. And it should be the same with us. We should all wrestle with God as much as we possibly can. To grab onto him and not let go. Because let's be honest, in this life, we're going to grab onto something. We're going to grab onto something, be it our family, job, money, sports, school, anything else in this world, we're going to grab onto it. But if we grab onto the things of the world, we will not succeed. But when we grab onto God and hold on to him with absolutely everything that we have, then we can grow and bring glory to him in everything that we do. And that is the meaning and the purpose of this life. So grab onto God and don't let go. Grab onto him and don't let go. And as you do that, we can grow. So this morning we're going to close with a song of worship and invitation. If you've never met Jesus, this is a good time to do it. If you've got a need, this is a good time to come forward. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for everything that you've given us. And we're so thankful for this story, all of these stories in Genesis of Isaac and Jacob and Esau. We are so thankful for them so that we can look back and take these truths out of Genesis and put them into our lives so that we can grow. And God, forgive us for those times where we didn't grab onto you or where we grabbed onto something other than you. Forgive us for those times. And break our hearts so that we can see that we need to hold on to you with everything that we have. We love you and we are yours. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.